to me?
We can hear you now.
You can hear me. Can you also see my screen? I just want to make sure before we start.
Yes, yeah, we can see your screen.
Great. All right, perfect. Okay. So I was contacted by Goucher about potentially, running a webinar about entrepreneurship, how I started my company, and how to, more importantly, not just start a company, but to actually keep it going. Because starting a company is very easy. Keeping it going over decades is immensely difficult. And so that's what we're here for today. But before we get terribly started on this, I don't know, is it possible for us to find out a little bit about what the people who are also in this webinar, what it is they'd like to get from it? Because I can kind of tailor the presentation to what people are looking to get from it, if that's possible, to get some feedback from some of the call-in participants. Is that possible?
Sure, yeah. People can type in their responses into the chat, or for the next minute or two, I can unmute everyone so that they can go ahead and ask any questions that they might have.
Yeah, if there's just anything in particular you're looking to get out of the webinar, I would be glad to tailor it to it. I want this to be a very casual, feel free to ask questions during it via chat so that we can tailor it to you. So any questions or anything in particular you're looking for? I'm not sure I can see the chat. Is there anything showing up on chat? I don't think that there is, but.
So it looks like there's a question about possibly starting a company without getting a loan.
Okay, I can actually talk about that. It wasn't included in what I was going to talk about, so that's great to know. I don't actually see that from the chat. Or maybe you can see some things that I can't, so you might need to help me on some of those things. But so when we get to the financial part of it, I'd be glad to go over that as well. And if I don't do that, remind me to talk about how I actually financed my company, because I never did get a loan. And in fact, the company has never had any debt and still doesn't to this day. So that's a really, really good question. Anything else in particular that you want me to include? Okay. Start. Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not seeing anything else, so I would say you could go ahead and get started.
Okay, let's get going then. So what we're here is to actually get to know who I am and what I did and to start a company. And there was a lot of things that I did wrong. There's a lot of things I did right, obviously, because I'm still in business. One of the best ways that I have found to learn is to make mistakes, and I've made tons of them along the way. And from those, I've learned not to repeat those mistakes. But one of the best ways to learn, way better than making mistakes, is to actually learn from someone else's mistakes. So I'm here to actually share quite a few of my mistakes and the things that I did right and wrong, so that hopefully you can learn from them and not repeat them. So as you said, I'm a 92 grad from Goucher, and I started my company in 1998. I am the founder and president of Zakia Technologies. I do have 3 other partners at this point. I did start my company actually while I was a stay-at-home mom. I had 2 kids in diapers. But currently we have about $4 million in sales annually with mostly Department of Defense. We have Homeland Security, Navy, and Army, so it's all DoD-based. And we have about 30 people employed. Our company is based pretty much, we do software engineering and geospatial. But I was an English literature major from Goucher, so I have no background whatsoever in software engineering or geospatial. But one of the things that I have found is that running a company, no matter what type of thing it is, it really doesn't matter, because running a company, whether you're going to start a snow cone stand or whether you're going to start a geospatial company, the same principles apply. And so we're going to talk about some of those principles that made the company work. I am also an extreme volunteer addict. I have a little Post-it note on my desk that says, stop me before I volunteer again. And obviously from this list you can see that I am not very successful at that. So these are some of my current volunteer gigs that I'm doing. And so maybe one day I'll get better at that. And so now I'm going to tell you just a little bit about Zakia, because even though a lot of these principles apply to pretty much any type of company, it's a good idea to know what it is that I do on a daily basis and what our company does. In addition to that, if for some reason you decide not to start your own company, hey, you can come work for me. So it's good to know who we do. So we are a software and geospatial solutions company. Most of our clients are DoD-based. We employ about 30 people. and everywhere from database developers, GIS analysts, and then obviously we have some administrative staff. We have 3 administrative staff that are HR, security, and contracts. And one of the best ways, everybody always asks me, what the heck does this Acaia do? And it is quite complicated. I used to, try to explain this to my mother, and, she'd be like, I don't know, it's something with computers. I can't figure it out. I don't know what it is she does. So one of the best ways that I have found to explain what it is that Acaia does is to actually explain some of the projects that we do. So I did select 4 different projects that I'm going to just quickly go over so that you can have a better understanding about what our company does. One of them is with the Department of Homeland Security, and there are all types of events that Homeland Security supports, and that can be everything from the Super Bowl that just happened to a presidential inauguration to something, a natural disaster like a hurricane. And our company does all of the maps, whether they're digital or whether they're paper, that supports that event. So, for example, for the Super Bowl, they're going to need to know where to place Secret Service agents so that they have the entire place covered, both visually and electronically. They also need to know where the sewer pipes are so that, in terms of Homeland Security, making sure that people are not in those sewer pipes and knowing where they are is really important. So we create those maps for those different events. Actually, there's only 8 analysts that do all of this, so it's pretty amazing that they are able to achieve all those things for all those different events. Another one, I love this one. As a taxpayer, I love this project because it's called the Laser Weapon System. And I'm sure most of you are familiar with something called a Tomahawk missile. Tomahawk missile, every single time it goes up, costs close to $10 million to send that missile out. Very, very expensive. It's also very effective, but it's very expensive. We were the sole programmers on a project that created something called the laser weapon system, and it essentially takes electricity and it creates a laser and it shoots down shoot down objects. Right now it's still very beta, so it can't shoot down like like a very large plane, but it can shoot down unmanned aircraft. It can slow down or disable the electronics on a ship. It can do lots of different things like that. But the really exciting part of this, and for me as a taxpayer, is that while the Tomahawk costs $10 million, this one costs 66 cents each time it's used. So it's very, very exciting that we were the people who helped create this. We also did a project called Capricornio, and Capricornio is a drug interdiction program. Colombia obviously has quite a few issues with drugs entering the United States from Colombia. So it was a joint program between the Colombian Navy and the U.S. Navy to help predict where the drugs were going to, the drug dealers and the drug traffickers were going to be, and then once we shut them down, where were they going to go next based off of geospatial or weather patterns or economic patterns. So it's taking past data and predicting where those drug traffickers are going to go next in the system. And last, we have something called NRL, and NRL is actually the client. And what we did was, NRL comes up with all types of camouflage. And at some point, you have to test that camouflage. Now, you can take that person and you can send them out into, Afghanistan, and you can go, okay, let's see how this camouflage works. But that's pretty dangerous. So it'd be much better to take that camouflage and test it in some place like Arizona. But you need to make sure that the conditions are the same. So this took millions and millions of pictures of all these different areas all throughout the world, and it helped predict, find areas so that if Afghanistan is where you're trying to test that camouflage, it found out that actually Arizona in the month of July or the last month, 2 weeks of July is the same as Afghanistan, and so you can actually test that camouflage there instead, which is obviously way more safe than sending somebody out to Afghanistan to test that camouflage. So any questions about any of that and what it is that we do? All right, we'll move on. So how did I get here, and how did I create this company? I was an English literature major, so certainly this was not where I planned on going. I never sat down and created a business plan and said, hey, I think one day I'm going to own a company, but here I am. So these are pictures of me when I was a kid. I grew up in a very unusual manner. I grew up without electricity or running water. My parents were, I guess, hippies before their time or after their time. I'm not sure how that's going to go, but I was highly involved in 4-H. That picture, I don't know if you can see pointers, but the picture at the top right, that's me in the top right. That's a dress that I actually sewed myself and earned a blue ribbon in the 4-H, and those are my sisters and I and our goats when we were kids. So then I went to a public high school, La Plata High School here in Maryland, and I played field hockey and I did all of those fun things that you do in high school. But I got a general basic education. I didn't get anything fancy at some fancy school. I went to a regular public school, attended regular public classes. And then I went to Goucher. And I'd love to say there's a great reason why I chose Goucher, but really honestly it's because I was playing field hockey and our team made it to the state finals. The state finals were held at Goucher. I got to Goucher and I said, wow, man, these fields are really nice. These are some pretty fields. I'd really like to play hockey here. So that's why I went to Goucher. Now, in addition to that, they also gave me a great financial package that allowed me to go there since my parents didn't have any money to send me there. So that helped quite a bit. The picture all the way to the right, that's me in the bottom left with my roommate giving me a nice little smooch. That was actually a gig, which I'm assuming, do you still have gig? I guess nobody can tell everybody's on board, but you do. You still have gig. That's great. Anyways, but that was a gig. We had a Western theme that year, so. But we had a lot of fun at Goucher, and Goucher was a lot of fun. I was an English literature major, and one of the great things that, I don't know what everybody's major is that's here, but one of the great things that Goucher gave me is it gave me options. And it gave me the ability to research and figure things out. So when I didn't know something, I didn't think it was a big deal. I just meant that I had to go figure out how to do it. Go get a book, go ask the questions, go talk to the people, figure out what I need to know in order to get to the next step. That's what Goucher taught me. So while I have an English literature degree and I run a software company, it really doesn't matter because what it taught me was how to figure things out. And that's one thing that I hope that you all are getting from your education. So after I graduated from Goucher, I worked for a couple different companies. I ended up having 2 kids. I became a stay-at-home mom, and I was a great mom. I was taking care of my kids and doing all these fun things. But I realized that I really kind of needed to do something more. At one point I realized that I was actually creating Excel spreadsheets on the energy savings on using a dryer one month and not using it the following month. And I said, all right, I got to do something more than be here with my kids, even though I love them dearly. So I started to do HTML. And back then, HTML was cool, new, and exciting, and nobody had ever heard of it. And I literally went to the library, got a book on HTML, and I started doing HTML in the evening, converting Word documents into HTML. And when I did, I joined a group called DC Web Women, which was a networking group. And networking, obviously, is a really important part of starting your company, is making those connections everywhere you go. And when I did, I joined the DC Web Women. I met a woman on there who was also a stay-at-home mom, who was kind of dabbling in work as well. And she lived in the city. I lived on a farm. And so I said, hey, why don't you bring your kids down? And we're just going to spend the day, and we're going to pet some cows and gather eggs from the chickens and hang out. And we had some grilled cheese, and it was a beautiful fall day, and we had all these fun days. And what I didn't realize that day was that was by far the most important business meeting of my life. And the reason is that about 6 months later, she calls me up and she says, hey, now I'm working for General Dynamics. And I have this contract with the Department of Justice, and it's converting Word documents into HTML. Would you like that contract? So this connection that I made over grilled cheese and some cows turned into my first government contract. And I wouldn't have known that the stay-at-home mom would have been my best business connection, but because I treated her with her respect, I told her what I wanted to do, and I told her my goals. And I stayed in connection with her. I stayed in contact with her after that grilled cheese lunch. We were able to make a connection business-wise later, and I was able to get a contract. So I call that my grilled cheese theory, and it's something that I teach to all my employees. You don't know where your next work is going to come from, so make sure you tell everyone where it is that you want to go, what your goals are, so that everyone is aware of it and everyone might be able to help you at some point. I'm going to go over some of the keys to success. And one of the things, too, I know one of the questions was, how do you do this without a loan? And when I first started this company, I was I had done some HTML, was working in the evenings. My husband was working for Booz Allen at the time. He saw an opportunity to get some additional work at another base outside of the company that he was working for. So he wanted to quit his job and go after that work. And I was like, heck no, there's no way. We have 2 kids. We ended up having 3 shortly afterwards. We have a mortgage. We have insurance to pay for. And there's no way in heck both of us are going to be self-employed at this point. So I said, I need to be able to make enough money to pay for the health insurance and the mortgage. And if we can do that, on my part-time evening hours after work, then you can quit and we can try to do this. So that's what we did. I started getting more work, and I didn't bite off more than I could chew. I took little tiny bits as I could, and I worked really hard, lots and lots of hours. And as I got more work, I kept putting it aside. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the financial side of this in a little bit, but that's really what I did, is I just built it very slowly and I worked really hard. So I never took a loan. A lot of the companies that fail, that you'll see fail, is because they wanted to get the fancy office or the fancy car or the fancy whatever happens to be that comes along with business. And instead, I ran it out of my basement. At one point, I was running it out of the corner of my living room. You have to do it kind of by a shoestring so that you can do this without a loan. It's a lot less stress if you don't have a loan to pay as well. And while starting a company is stressful to start with, at least you don't have the stress of a loan as well. So I really do recommend starting a company without a loan if you can. But sometimes a loan is necessary, so I'm not totally against them. It's just in my case I was able to do it without it, and if you can, I recommend doing it that way, if you can. So some of the keys to success and why this company has succeeded and has been in business since 1998, because, like I said, anybody can start a company and make and form an LLC, but keeping it in business is a whole other thing. And I alluded to this a minute ago. One of them is I worked my ass off. I mean, and bottom line, you can have lack of talent, you can have lack of opportunities, you can have lack of connections, but if you work your tail off like nobody's business, you will succeed at this. It's just, when I say work hard, I don't know that people completely understand what work hard means. In many cases, I was working until 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning, sleeping for an hour, and then working again the entire day. For the first decade of this business, I worked insane hours. I mean, crazy. You talk about 40 hours a week. Well, I was working at least 80 hours a week at a minimum. Many, many days, even after I had a company, an office, I would sleep on my floor. You really have to work hard at this. And I cannot stress enough that the number of hours you put in is important. I've heard from so many people, it must be great doing your own company. You can set your own hours. You can do what you want. It gives you flexibility. And it does to a certain extent. But what you're really doing is when you own your own company is you're working for every single one of your employees and you're working for every single one of your clients. So you don't just have one boss. You have every employee and every client is your boss. And you're going to work your tail off to make this happen. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it, because it is very rewarding and you are providing a livelihood for quite a few people. You're able to make a difference in the world. In my case, we're working for Department of Defense. I feel like I'm providing a great benefit to the taxpayers because we're providing a good value and a great product. I'm actually able to change how things are happening out there in the Department of Defense world. These are really important things. I've been able to make a big difference, and I've made a great living at it. I mean, I make good money because of this, but I put in a great investment of time. So work hard. So that's the first element of it. The second one is to take advantage of opportunities and take calculated risks. So I'm going to tell you a story, I guess, about this bravery and bravado part of this. Many years ago, before I started this company, I was working as a consultant. I was pregnant, I think, with my first or second kid, but I think my first one, it had to have been my first one. And I was working as a technical writer, and I was getting work from this guy who kind of had projects off and on, and he called me up one day, and he said, hey, I have this project. I need a consultant, a PowerPoint consultant. And I said, okay, that's great. I know how to do PowerPoint. And now you can tell from this lovely PowerPoint that I'm showing you that I'm not great at it anymore, but at one time I was pretty good at this. And he goes, it's downtown. I was living in Chicago at the time. He goes, it's downtown. I need you to go down there and do this PowerPoint job for 3 days as the PowerPoint expert. He goes, the only problem is that it's on Microsoft Windows. And that's back when Microsoft Windows was just coming out, and it was really clunky and looked really awful. And at the time, I was working on Apple products. But I'm like, I'll figure it out. I'll be fine. I'll take the job. I can do it. So I went downtown, and I showed up on my first day, and the guy comes over, and he shows me all the things that he needs me to do with this PowerPoint and all the cool things he wants it to look like. And I'm like, that's no problem. I can do all that. And he leaves, and I take a look at the computer, and I realize I have no clue how to even open the file because it's on this Windows that I can't figure out even how to open the darn folder up to find the file that I need to work on. But I certainly don't want to go to the guy and go, hey, I have no idea how to open the folder, because then I'm certainly not the expensive consultant that he's paying for and this PowerPoint expert. So I thought there for a little bit, and I'm like, what the heck am I going to do? I thought a little bit longer. I started to freak out a little, and then I said, get it together, Brianna. You can do this. So it was a big company. It had probably about 6 or 7 floors of people in this high rise, and I went up 4 flights. Walked into that section of the same office, and I said, hey, look, I'm working on the 4th floor, and I'm not able to. I usually work on the Apple side of things, and I'm not able to open this folder. I just asked some guy who was sitting in a cubicle, can you show me how to open this folder? And he showed me, and I said, hey, thanks a lot. Walked downstairs, opened my folder, was able to complete the job, and nobody was the wiser that I was not the expert that I thought I was. That was a little bit of bravado, a little bit of bravery. It really wasn't that I had talent or expertise. It was that I didn't freak out eventually, after I did freak out, and I figured it out. I pretended I knew what I did even when I didn't, and so then everyone around me believes I did as well. That's important. You can't be a leader in your company unless everyone believes in you, and nobody's going to believe in you unless you believe in yourself and put that forth. The other thing is you have to calculate a risk, and calculate is a really important part of this. That means you have to do your research. And then once you do your research, you have to be able to step off the cliff and do it, because doing nothing is worse than doing the wrong thing. It's just sitting there. So I'm going to give you one more example of that. When I first started, growing the company, it was getting large enough where I really needed some office space. I went and I met with a real estate agent. He showed me this office space, and it was a really nice office space. And he says, it's going to be $150,000 for this build-out. I'm thinking, there is no way I can spend $150,000 on this office space. I can't do it. It's crazy. That's a ton of money. So I said, I can't do it. So about 6 months later, I really had to get office space. There was no way around it. So I went back to the guy, and I'm like, look, I really do need some office space. So he showed me the office about 2 doors down from the one that I had originally looked at. And by then, the prices had gone up, and they were $200,000. And I had to buy it. I mean, there was no way around it. I had to get it. So essentially, I lost $50,000 in my head because I wasn't able to take that calculated risk. I should have done my research and figured out what it is that was going on in the real estate world. Was that property going to appreciate, depreciate? Figure it out, and then take the calculated risk. Step off the cliff and not be afraid. That's really, really important. I've seen too many people and entrepreneurs get stuck in their spreadsheets, and a lot of this comes down to what's in your gut. You really have to just believe in yourself and believe in what your gut is telling you, and take advantage of every opportunity out there. And let's see. Whoops, going up one more. This is a pretty good one. I told you I volunteer. I volunteer everywhere, all over the place. And that's really important, both because it's a good thing to do for the world and be a good person, but it's also because it makes great connections. If people see you out there volunteering and making the world a better place, they believe in you. Both your employees and potential clients are going to believe that you're worthy of investing in, both either with their time as your employee or with their dollars as your client. So it's very important that you be kind and give back. Another part of this is to stay clean. In my case, I work for Department of Defense, and so I'm required to have a top-secret facility clearance. In order to have a top-secret facility clearance, I have to have a top-secret clearance. And in order to do that, I've got to stay clean. And clean means that I have no bankruptcies, that I have not taken out loans that I cannot pay back, that I cannot be bribed in any way because I am in bad financial situation, that I don't have a DUI, I don't have any other felonies, I don't have any drug convictions. And, you know, when you're 18, 19, 20 years old, maybe it doesn't seem all that important that, you know, that you stay that clean. But these things will really hurt you going forward if you don't keep your background clean. Whether you have to get an investigation or not, it's really very, very important. Another part of that, and I know you've probably been pounded on this since you were young kids, is that keeping your Facebook status and your Twitter status and all of those different things, all the different social medias are very clean as well, because I can tell you that when I hire people, I search for things like on their Facebook and all of those type of things to see what's out there. Are they full of drama or are they drama-free? And so keep that part of your life very clean as well. And lastly is into the financials. So, you know, the reason you start your company, most people start their company, or a lot of people start their company, is because they want to be wealthy. And a lot of entrepreneurs do become wealthy. But people are confused what wealth is. People think wealth is income. It's how much money you make. You know, if I make $1 million a year, I'm wealthy. But wealth is actually the difference between income and expenses. It's how much money you make minus the money you spend. That's your wealth. And so both of those elements, both the income and the expenses, are immensely important. So you can make a ton of money, but if you spend it all, then you're not wealthy at all. I mean, you've seen, you know, people who are, you know, the NFL players make a ton of money, but they're bankrupt. That's not wealthy. So you have to cut your expenses as well and make sure that you live frugally. When we first started our company, oh my goodness, we would never even go to McDonald's. I mean, McDonald's was like a huge deal. You don't ever go there, even though we had little kids who wanted to go, because we were literally socking away every penny we had so that we could reinvest it in ourselves and our company. I knew that I was going to one day need office space, and I'm going to have that cash to do so. So cutting your expenses now, before you start a company, is really important so that you can have that nest egg to go invest into your company. By far, that is the most important part of starting a company and doing it without debt, is to cut your expenses. The income will come, but you've got to cut your expenses. And everybody, you kind of get used to the things that you spend. You know, everybody has a cable bill. I actually haven't had a cable bill for 15 years. We literally have an antenna, and I still do it because, you know, it's $110, $150 a month that I'm saving by not having that. So really take a real hard look at the things that you're spending money on and see what you can cut. See what really is necessary. Do you really want to start this company? And if you do, you're going to have to make sacrifices, both in sleep and time, effort, and in luxuries too. Eating out, consider you can't do it. Start learning how to cook, because you're not going to be able to afford it at first when you're first starting this company. So those are the main things. Oh, there's one more. Actually, one more thing that I think is really important, and that is those connections. You know, we talked about a little bit about volunteering and being there, but making those connections and then keeping those connections are immensely important to succeeding in starting a company. So start forming, you know, your Rolodex. You know, nobody uses a Rolodex anymore, but, you know, your Outlook connections or whatever it is, and start, you know, get on LinkedIn. Start forming, start connecting on there. Ask people for things. Tell them what it is that you want to do. Tell them your goals and what it is, where you're trying to get, and ask them specifically for what you want. You're not going to get something unless you ask for it. So if you're hoping that some guy that you met on the bus is going to be able to introduce you to somebody at his company, you need to ask for it. Don't assume he's going to know because you said you want to start a company. Say, hey, can you make this connection, and can you make this connection next Thursday at 3 o'clock? Specifically ask the question. And then stay in contact with people over and over and over again. It takes multiple times. They'll forget you unless you stay in connection with people. So those are all my advice for starting and keeping a company going, but I'd be really open to any questions that anybody has, and either about things we've already discussed or anything in particular. I'd be glad to discuss any of it. I don't know if you, is anybody, are they still on mute?
I'm still on mute.
Any questions at all?
It sounds like someone's trying to ask a question, but it might be a little bit muddled.
Well, I am on a Zoom conference right now.
Okay. I mean, and chat's fine. I can re-see the chat. I see there's a question about LinkedIn.
You want to hear it?
Yes, please. Etiquette about LinkedIn. That's actually a really good question. A while ago, I added somebody on LinkedIn. And in case people can't see this question, it was a question about LinkedIn. And the question was, I'm not sure what the etiquette is when it comes to adding people you don't know. And one time I was adding somebody on LinkedIn, and they wrote back, and they're like, hey, I don't know who you are. And so, and I responded back to them. I'm like, look, LinkedIn's different than, other social medias. You add everybody because you're really careful about what you put out on LinkedIn. You're not putting really personal things. You're putting things like, hey, I got a promotion, or hey, I have a new sales product that I'm, promoting. Because you're not putting real personal information, the larger the connection, the better there is. And so I regularly add people on LinkedIn who I don't know all the time. I probably have 10,000 people on LinkedIn. I certainly have not met all 10,000 of them. And one of the things is the more people you have on LinkedIn, the more people who then connect to you, and that's all good. There's really no such thing as having too many people on LinkedIn connected to you. Does that answer the question? All right, cool.
So I have another question here about how this has impacted your family life. I think they're asking about how starting and running a business and being an entrepreneur.
I think both positively and negatively. Negatively, I'm going to go to my children. At first. My husband kind of came along for the ride, and he knew what he was getting into. But my kids didn't sign up for this. Positively, I think that they have benefited in that, one, their parents make good money, so that's always helpful because now they've been able to choose which college they wanted to go to, so that's always good. They've also benefited because they really have a wonderful work ethic because they've seen what it really means to succeed. That their parents work crazy hours, and they've seen us go through that. Another positive is that the kids, when I first started this company, they went places with me because I had not money to pay for a babysitter. So they sat in on board meetings. They watched me do things. They saw me do the conference calls. In a negative way, there were a lot of things. I'll tell you another story about when my kids were still in diapers, and I'm sitting here trying to run a company, and I'm having a conference call with a client. And, I'm giving my kids snacks and probably way too much juice beforehand to try to keep them quiet so I can do these conference calls. And at one point, probably the call got a little long, and I could see they were going to be asking for something. And I literally, this is going to sound terrible, but I crawled into a coat closet, climbed underneath about 15 coats, and hid from them so that, it muffled the sound of them yelling for their juice, that they wanted more juice. That doesn't make me parent of the year. There's no doubt about it. But, my kids survived, and it certainly wasn't the end of the world. But it's not easy. It is not easy trying to do this and raise a family, too. There's no doubt about it. I did miss quite a few kids' events. On the plus side, I also had a little bit of flexibility, so I could sit there with my laptop and attend my kids' track meets, with my laptop and do some work, in between his runs. So positive and negative, both. Any other, does that answer the question, or is there more on that?
It was a pretty short question. I think you probably touched on everything.
Okay. Any other questions from anyone else? Going back to LinkedIn, since all of you are on here, and at some point, whether you're going to go get a job, or whether you're going to start a company, or whether you're going to remain unemployed for some reason, I'm on LinkedIn. I expect every one of you to be sending me a connection so that you can connect to me via LinkedIn. If not, then you're not following through the way that you should be. So I should be seeing all kinds of invitations rolling through any minute from all of you. All right. Any other questions?
I think that's everything.
All right. Once you have connected with me via LinkedIn too, I'm going to put the invitation out there that any of you feel free to contact me via LinkedIn or otherwise. I'd be glad to answer any questions that you have. It's not easy starting a company, but it is something that if I had to go back in time, 20 years ago to start this over again, I would do it again, which means it's not too bad. But it's not an easy process. And anybody who thinks it is deluding themselves. But it is definitely worthwhile. I have made way more money owning my own company than I ever would have in the private world. And it's fun.
Great. Thank you so much for your time today, Brianna. I definitely appreciated all of your insight and all of the information that you provided.
No problem.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.